house. This was Robert E. Lee's plantation. This was his home before the Civil War. He married into George Washington's family.
Yeah.
And so this was George Washington's land. So prime, beautiful location overlooking our nation's capital.
Welcome to Talk with History. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jen.
Hello.
On this podcast, we give you insights to our history-inspired world travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history through deeper conversations with the curious, the explorers, and the history lovers out there. Now, we don't have any guests tonight, so before we get to the main topic, I want to ask for our listeners, if you're listening on the podcast, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really, really helps out. Or just spread the word about the podcast. We're shooting for trying to beat the History Channel. I think we're a little ways off. So we've got some ways to go, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. In 1864, the beginnings of America's most hallowed cemetery were born on the family grounds of the likes of George Washington and Robert E. Lee. Yes, those two giants of history are distantly related, but this is not a discussion about the founding of America or the Civil War. Today, we are giving you the lessons we have learned in at least half a dozen visits to Arlington National Cemetery. Now, I can honestly say that we've probably been to almost every corner of Arlington, and it never gets old walking amongst those who sacrificed their lives through service to our country. And if you ever plan on visiting Arlington, hang with us to the end because you will be happy to hear these tips and tricks for your visit that some of these you can't find online. So, Jen, let's talk a little bit about kind of getting to Arlington. What's kind of the first thing that people need to think about?
You need to think about navigating in Washington, D.C.
That's for sure. Driving through D.C. is, I'm sorry, it's just awful.
My husband has an aversity to turn circles in Washington, D.C. and seems to miss the the right off-ramp every time. So there's a turn circle getting into Arlington,
yep.
And it's across from the Lincoln Memorial. If you go another direction, you could head towards the Roosevelt Park Island or Iwo Jima, but you got to make sure you're hitting the right off-ramp for Arlington National Cemetery.
Yeah, and actually getting to Arlington's probably one of the easier spots to get to because it's not really in the heart of DC. It's kind of on the outskirts. But you get there, you get through the big turn circle there, and there's clear signs, so you can get in there. Parking's pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward. It's pretty much you're going to drive straight ahead. You're going to see a big monument, but parking's going to be directly off to the left. It's technically in Virginia.
Right.
So people like to say D.C., Arlington National Cemetery, but I've been corrected on that a couple times online. Yeah. It's technically Virginia. And then when you park off to the left, you have to pay for parking now. And we show that in the video. So you'd be aware, I think it's $3 an hour, $12 for the day.
Yeah, when we had gone just after COVID started opening up a little bit, and the parking was free for a little while, but they started kind of charging for parking, and it's not bad.
But that's all they charge
$3
for.
an hour.
If you Uber, they'll let you out right before the parking garage, and you won't pay for anything.
Yeah,
so.
You can catch a cab or an Uber right up there. Yeah. And again, there's plenty of parking, so I don't think it's something that you really have to worry about.
No, but we recommend paying at the kiosk. Yeah. Before, because it's just quicker to get out when you leave. So.
Yeah. And the couple times we've been there, we've seen people struggling as they've been like trying to pay and they get out and the machine stops working. So Get your ticket, do the tour, come back, pay at the kiosk first, and then drive out. Then you can just scan your ticket and get out.
And then getting into Arlington, you're going to go through a main building that is a little bit of the history, and you'll see they have some little displays there, which are nice. You'll walk through a metal detector. And it is free to go to Arlington. It's free to walk to Arlington. It's free to attend the changing of the guard. But the trams cost money.
Yeah.
And we recommend your very first time there taking the tram.
Yeah, and just so you know, too, for those of you listening, if you watch our video that's coming out tomorrow, that tomorrow's video is kind of all these tips and tricks. And so we actually show you kind of like where you can buy the tram tickets. And actually, Arlington's relatively accessible by wheelchair. So it's pretty accessible by wheelchair.
Yeah. And even the trams are accessible by wheelchair. And they're very accommodating to any kind of handicaps. So there's two things you can do. You can take the tram. The tram is kind of like a guided tour. They stop at 4 locations. They'll stop at John F. Kennedy's grave. They'll stop at the Tomb of the Unknown. They stop, I think, at Pershing's grave.
Yep. And then Arlington House.
Or you can see the trolleys. Now, the trolleys are separate. If you want to pay for a trolley tour, they're an hour long, and you can get a group together, and you can pay for the trolley tour. Now, veterans get a discount on tickets, and it's free if you're in uniform. And then it's almost like half price for veterans and their families. But that's just for the tram. It's not for the tour. So if you're going to do one of those trolley tours, and the trolley tour will be much more in depth, I'm sure they'll take you where you want to go. You could probably make it more specific to maybe something you want to see, because there are different subject areas in Arlington.
Yep.
The tram is just the basic route that will stop at those locations. Now, the tram you can hop on and off. It's not as if you have to stay with the group and the time you left with. If you want to go to the changing of the guard, then walk around and then hit another tram at a different location.
And the neat thing about the tram as well is, one, obviously you've got someone sitting on the tram, and they'll actually talk about graves as they drive by them. Yeah. So even though they don't stop at all of the graves that you may want to jump off at, and they're not going to stop just because you kind of raise your hand and say you want to stop. They've got their kind of 4 designated stops, but they'll talk about graves as they drive by them. So we've been at Arlington before, filming near a gravesite, near someone that was relatively famous. It might have been Lee Marvin or
the Tuskegee Airmen
or something like that. And the tram will drive by and they'll talk about like, oh, over there you see
where that person's standing.
Audie Murphy is right over there. And actually, so that's one of the things you can do that's nice to do is if you jump off at one of these stops, and let's say you just saw the changing of the guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, Audie Murphy he's right across the street.
Yeah.
So there's you can hit some of those other pretty famous spots near where those stops are. Now, you're not going to be off like way in the corners. Mm-hmm. Like the tram's not going to take you out to like where Gunny Ermey is, because he's way off in like a newer corner.
Be prepared if you're going to see him. The tram doesn't go out there, and you might be able to get the trolley to take you out there, but the tram does not go anywhere near there.
Yeah, but they do. We've been there enough, and we've had the trolley or the tram drive by us enough times. I always hear them talking about like as they go, right? Mm-hmm. So these are pretty good tour guides who know what they're talking about.
Oh yeah, and they're going to hit the ones you want to see. Medgar Evers. They're going to hit the 2 presidents buried there, Taft and Kennedy.
I think Joe Louis.
They talk about Joe Louis. They talk about the Tuskegee Airmen. They'll talk about the shuttle, the space shuttle astronauts that are there.
Yep.
So it's really good too, in case you're like, oh, I want to go back. I want to see that. If your first time, kind of to get an idea of location. It'll also give you a lay of the land. Arlington is very big. How many acres is it?
It's a couple hundred acres. Yeah, it's a lot.
It's big, and we go into the history of it. If you ever watch one of our Walk with History videos about Arlington House, this was Robert E. Lee's plantation. Yeah, this was his home before the Civil War. He married into George Washington's family, and so this was George Washington's land. So prime, beautiful location overlooking our nation's capital, because George Washington, one of the founding fathers, could be like, hey, I like this land. It has a great view of the Potomac and a great view over here of the Capitol. And so if you go to Arlington House, it is a beautiful view of Washington, D.C. Well, when Robert E. Lee leaves to join the Civil War, his wife also leaves and flees. And I talk about this in other videos, and you can watch this animosity between people who served together, because Robert E. Lee went to West Point with people who were on the Union Army, and they're mad at each other because now you're basically taking arms against your fellow countrymen. And so one of the quartermasters, Meade, who was really good friends with Lee and was very upset, decided to start burying Civil War dead at his plantation. And that's how Arlington starts. And if you want to see those original graves, they're still there. Yep. And we talk about where sections those are in and the locations. But that's how Arlington starts. And we go into just the history of it. So you're going to have people there from the Civil War on. Now, there are older graves there, and the oldest grave is not military related at all. It's a woman who was related to the Lee family, to the Washington family, and because she was buried on the plantation home. But we talk about who's buried there today, and you're going to find all different types of people who have served. There are even Confederates buried at Arlington National Cemetery.
A small section for them.
Yes.
And you know, kind of segueing from that, the Arlington National Cemetery website has tons of great lists. It's a phenomenal website, right? So a lot of what we're telling you probably could find on there. Mm-hmm. I think our video is nice because it'll show you where you can go and what you can do, and kind of give you those examples that they won't show you on the website. But one of the things that you can do is, if you want to go see all the astronauts buried, right, at Arlington National Cemetery, there's a spot on the website where you have that. Now, when you get there, it would be difficult because you'd have to write down the sections and the gravesite numbers and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So one of the things to do, and we show this multiple times in the video, is to download the Arlington National Cemetery app. So it's a free app, and it actually gives you directions to these famous grave sites. So in the app, it has a lot of the same information from the website. Mm-hmm. So, and then if you're looking for more specific information, like you can't look up Maureen O'Hara by her actor's name.
No.
You have to look her up by her married name. Yes. And so you have to look her up by last name of Blair.
Yes.
So you look that up, and you'd be able to find where her gravesite is, which is actually, it's not far from the JFK.
Yeah. It's close.
Gravesite.
Yeah. It's close.
It's actually very, very close.
Very close. And we do a good job as well. Location is kind of difficult to infer on the app, especially hillsides. So it looks pretty flat when you're looking at it on the app. You're like, oh, that's not bad. But anything, and I recommend this, anything by Tomb of the Unknown is pretty steep.
Yeah.
And when we find Constance Bennett, like, she's an actress, we did a whole video on actors and actresses at Arlington.
Oh, yeah.
She's steep. Like,
yeah, she's like high. I thought it was higher than Arlington House.
Yeah.
But so if you want to get your steps into Arlington, you definitely can.
It can. We've put on a lot of miles there.
Yeah.
We've broken sweats there.
Oh, yeah.
It can be difficult, so you got to be in pretty good shape. You're not technically allowed to exercise at Arlington National Cemetery. You're not allowed to jog, but you can walk fast.
Yeah, and just sometimes just walking around, especially in the summertime there, it's really warm. Mm-hmm. Now, so that the app's super handy, and it will actually give you directions, right?
It
so
will.
It'll give you shortest directions, so kind of the shortest path you can take. It'll give you directions where if you can't do stairs, it'll say, okay, avoid stairs. Mm-hmm. So that might help if you're with someone in a wheelchair, or if you don't have, good knees or something like that.
Yes.
But so that the app is fantastic. I highly recommend it. Maybe more so if you go like a second time. You can do it for the first time. Mm-hmm. The first time it can be a lot. So I recommend, even in the video, and I would recommend to anybody going the first time is doing the tram tour. That's probably the best bang for your buck.
Your first time, I would definitely do that too. Get a lay of the land. One thing the app doesn't do that we do a pretty good job of, it's not going to show you if the tombstone looks different. So there are some tombstones, a lot of them are uniform, the white tombstone, but there are some that are different. And Maureen O'Hara is one of them. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Joe Louis, Taft, JFK, Robert Lincoln. They look different. And so that's not just deciphered on the app. So when you're walking around looking, you might be like, where is the grave? And so we can tell you this one looks like a uniform tombstone. Yeah. This one looks like a different one.
Yeah. Now, most of the graves, like I think one section we're in, actually where Colin Powell is, section 60. So that's one of the newer sections. And that one's pretty easy to navigate because all the graves are sequentially numbered. Mm-hmm. So if you have a section number and you have a grave site, you can infer pretty quickly, you know, where it's going to be. And that's actually a tip that we give in the video, which I don't think they would say this on the website, is if you have kids with you and you're looking for a specific site, you can go to the section and then give your kids the number right?
them, 'cause-
and just have them go.
Yes,
right?
because it's not always symmetrical. It's not always easy, and sometimes it resets. You'll go all the way, and then it resets. All the way
Yeah,
on the
so
other
it'll
side.
save you a lot of running around and looking. Be like, okay, kids, right? We're in this section. Find this gravesite number, and they'll just kind of take off.
Yes.
So, and we talk about that. We've been there enough times, and our kids know they've been around enough cemeteries to know not to carry on too much.
Yeah, they have a sign that says silence and respect.
Yeah.
I would say no listening to loud music, no talking loud, but no like carrying on. But I think kids and laughter and walking through the cemetery, you will see families there.
Yeah.
And so I think you do still want to have this presence of your family and and remembering someone in a positive sense. But there is no like live music or anything like that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that the few times that we've been there, most of the time, most folks aren't like us looking around trying to find, a specific gravesite to talk about the history or talk about the person. Usually they're there either to visit, an old family member, someone they may have served with, someone they knew.
Yes, or Tomb in the Unknown. Most people
a lot of the Tomb in the Unknown.
want to see changing of the guard.
But so even in section 60, I think we chatted very briefly with a family.
Yeah.
They were looking for someone.
Someone looking for someone. And we kind of help them. We help them look, I think, too. And people are usually buried in sequence of funeral and death.
Okay.
That's usually how it happens. You don't really have a place saved for you or anything like that unless you're buried with a spouse or a parent or a child.
Yep.
So when people are buried, it's usually in a sequence of when you've been approved to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery. So that's kind of like the order it's going in as they bring in people to be funerals. They do it in sequential order. When you first walk into Arlington and make the left, right past the trams, you'll see a black sign and it'll have
we
numbers.
show it on the video.
And it'll have last names on it. And those are the funerals for the day. And they'll have parking lots right beside that with the names on that. And usually that's where the family will go and drive and wait for their funeral to start. Because almost every funeral at Arlington National Cemetery is with the horse and the wagon. They do it's all, a full.
Yeah, and it's just a full ceremony.
Full ceremony for the person. And so it's an active cemetery. If it really calls for it, you might even see a flyover. So you have to be prepared. Like they're doing burials every day. Arlington National Cemetery is open 365 days a year. The trams go 363 days a year. They're only off for 2 days when they lay the wreaths.
Oh, wow.
And that's it. Other than that, they're open. When it comes to leaving stuff on graves, you'll see people leave flowers. We've left flags.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see people sometimes put up pictures. We've left rocks and coins. Coins have significance. They definitely mean something. But for the most part, Arlington doesn't sanction leaving anything except for the wreaths and the flags on Veterans Day. But so most things will probably be cleaned off within a week. So just be aware of that as well.
Yeah, and that's actually what you said earlier is another good point, is you can't, the parking's easy to get to, but 99% of the public can't drive into Arlington. The only folks who are going to be authorized or allowed to even drive into Arlington, it's not like, they actually have people stopping, folks from driving into Arlington National Cemetery, is, for a funeral.
For a funeral.
Or if they have like a specific pass because they have a family member buried there.
And they're disabled.
Right? So if they're handicapped and they can't walk all the way there.
To see their son, daughter, spouse.
Right. So
child.
you will see cars driving through Arlington National Cemetery on occasion, but there's not a lot, which is nice if you want to go and walk around because it's pretty safe, right? I mean, it's wide enough for two cars to pass each other.
Yes.
But everybody's just kind of walking out in the middle of the street. So, and that's another nice thing. If you want to take your family ever, you can take your kids and you can feel pretty safe with them walking around.
Yes. It's that is a great thing about it. And it is a good place for you to be with your family, and if you have some history lessons that you want to show, because there is a lot of history there.
We've seen like probably high school classes, like field trips out there. We've seen that, you know, like a gaggle of 30, 14-year-olds.
Exactly. The changing of the guard we've had this discussion on another podcast because we argued about how often they change, right? And we were both right. And it's pretty much every time. Sometimes it's 30 minutes, sometimes an hour, sometimes it's 2 hours. And that could be all in the same day. So during the summer months, it's every 30 minutes because it's hot.
It's just hot.
And then during the winter, I think it's every hour.
Yeah. And
then after Arlington closes, it's every 2 hours. So it's manned 24 hours a day. But after Arlington is closed, they are out there for 2 hours at a time. Now, that's what people want to see. That does have a lot of ceremony attached to it. Silence, respect. You can't get close. You can't pass the chain. The guard will address you if you do. He'll address you if you're loud, and he'll address you if you try to cross the chain. So even children. So you have to make sure and most people will stand during the changing.
So I read a very interesting thing about the Army unit that's in charge of the changing of the guard. So the ribbon or the medal that they get for being a part of that unit is the second least awarded medal in the entire Army.
Wow.
Because it's so difficult and they screen so highly for members to go be a part of this Army unit. It is no joke.
It's you can't
what
drink
these guys are doing.
Even off duty.
Yeah.
You can't drink at all. You're a guard of the Tomb of the Unknown. You are dry for your whole tour.
Yeah.
And I'm sure leave is probably limited.
Yeah, it's got to be.
I think you probably get a haircut like once a week, once every 3 days.
Yeah. There's videos online that kind of show what these guys go through. I mean, it takes like 6 to 9 months just to train in order to be allowed to be one of the soldiers out there.
It's crazy.
It's pretty wild. And it really is. There's a lot of power to watching some of these changing of the guards. For the first time.
Oh yeah, it's so special.
Yeah,
and honoring to be there. I mean, this is America's, guarding of our soldiers that have died. Now we have soldiers there represented from World War I and World War II. I think the Vietnam veteran was identified, and so was the Korean veteran. That's just the way we honor the people who have fought for our country. I have never seen uniforms more squared away.
Oh, yeah.
And hair,
rags,
more squared away.
I mean, they go through a full-blown uniform inspection, not only before they go out kind of to take over, but that's essentially part of their ceremony is being inspected by the other person.
Yes.
It's pretty cool. So, without rambling on about Tomb of the Unknown Soldier too much, those are the kind of the couple things. That's why the trams stop at those couple spots, right? JFK, Tomb of the Unknown, Arlington House. They're all not too far from each other, but they're on this big hill.
Yes.
So again,
be prepared. Most people will go to JFK and be like, "Oh, I'll walk to Tomb of the Unknown. It's right there. It's almost straight uphill." So
it's a hike. And even going from JFK up to Arlington House, right? It's just up the hill, but you got to walk around a bunch of graves and then go up like probably like 100 stairs. And these are not like normal stairs. These are like big double step stairs. So you like step up. It's a lot of walking, which I really enjoy because it wears the kids out. For sure. And
Arlington House has great history. We have a whole video from there. Robert E. Lee was married there.
Yep.
That's the home where he left before the Civil War. It's the home his wife basically ran away from. So it has a lot of history, that home as well. The person who laid out the city of D.C., DuPont, what's his name?
Yeah.
He's buried up there, right at Arlington House. So he has a very unique tomb as well. It's just a really cool thing to see. So I definitely recommend going up there. It wasn't always open. It just opened again, and it's free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, again, if you go on the Arlington National Cemetery website, there's a section for Arlington House, right? They're all the popular things. And you can see a picture from 1864 with the soldiers sitting out in front of Arlington House, and it looks exactly the same. It's got those big columns. So it's really neat because you can see the old picture, obviously black and white, with these, Civil War era soldiers sitting out front, just kind of lounging around like, they're not looking at the camera.
No.
And then today's Arlington House, it's pretty cool.
It's very neat. There's also the Women's Museum there. So that big memorial you see driving into Arlington, that's the Women in the Military Memorial. That's what you see driving in. It has the fountain that's in front. And off to the side is an actual museum that you can walk through. And so that is open as well. And that'll have a gift shop in there. And they have the history of women in the military. They have some really great displays, a lot of artifacts, and they tell a really great story of women in the military. Plus, there's graves you can visit of certain women who have served that are buried in Arlington. And we have a whole video dedicated to that if you're interested in seeing that.
Yeah. And so Tommy in the chat just brought up a great point. He said that the tomb badge, which is that badge I was talking about, is the only military award that can be taken away for dishonoring the badge through actions after leaving the military. Oh. And I'm not surprised based on everything that we've heard about just being a part of that unit. I mean, that's probably the highest bar you can set in many military units out there. So just as far as character and you representing that unit.
You have to want that duty.
Yeah.
You're like, it's not something you like, oh, darn. It's like you want it. I think it's competitive to get it.
Oh, yeah.
Like you want that duty.
Last but certainly not least, one of the things that we kind of discovered that I don't see a lot out there, and we talk about it in the video, is spouses that are married, that are buried together. So one of the things we show, and we talked about it on some of the other videos, but a lot of the husbands and wives that are buried together, the husband is, or the person who served is typically on the front, and then their spouse is actually on the back. Yes. So if you're walking around at the different sections and you see the front where the kind of the more ceremonial stuff, maybe some of their, medals that they earned or something like that, then the spouse is on the back. And so that's what you're seeing on the back is the spouse and like when he or she was buried with them. And
we kind of explained that in the Priscilla Lane video, because Priscilla Lane's another famous actress who's buried at Arlington, but she's on the back of her husband's stone. Now, it does not mean the spouse is buried behind the stone. They're still buried side by side, but they're just represented on the back part of the stone. Now, you're going to see certain graves too that just say the child of Private so and so, or the spouse of so and so. Eligibility to be buried in Arlington has changed throughout the years. Of course, during the Civil War, it was pretty much after, it was a needed burial ground for people who have served in the military, and the eligibility was just that you had served. As Arlington has become more crowded, space has gotten more precious and preserved, eligibility has changed. So you won't see as many children buried by themselves without a parent or someone else there. Now it's still active duty. Who died during service, veterans.
Yep, who retire.
I could be buried there as a veteran, but not in the ground. A lot of the niches, the column, the bariums, which we go to in one of our videos as well, that's eligible for veterans, which is mostly ashes. But it's changing. Now, Arlington is kind of spreading out. We're getting more land, but the eligibility keeps getting updated. So when you see things like that, you're like, well, I thought this, I thought that. It's changed throughout the years. So just be aware of that.
Yeah. So this is kind of just like I had actually put out a couple polls on the YouTube channel, and I said, hey, what do you guys want to see more of? Are you guys interested in behind the scenes type videos? Are you interested in kind of tips and tricks and kind of what it's like there? And the there's a decent amount of responses for how young our channel is. And folks were kind of overwhelmingly saying like, yes, I'd love kind of tips and tricks on how to visit some of these more popular places and some behind the scenes videos. So hopefully this is a video that you guys are interested in. If you're listening to the podcast, you can go check it out. And then if you're watching the live stream, you can check it out when it comes out tomorrow. So
yes. And if you have any questions for us, please let us know. We've probably have done it or seen it at Arlington.
Yeah.
There are cool things to see. Like the mast of the Main is there. Yeah. There are there's a lot of different statues and things that kind of commemorate certain people, like the Tuskegee Airmen or the astronauts. Yeah. But if you have any questions for us, please let us know. It is to us America's most hallowed ground. We really love visiting there and honoring everybody who has served and is buried there. We feel like visiting them and honoring them and showing them to viewers is just giving them some recognition for their lives. So we're really honored to do that.
Absolutely. And if you still have your visit to Arlington National Cemetery planned, we hope that these tips and tricks help you on your journey. It's amazing to walk through the grave sites of presidents, Supreme Court justices, astronauts, and Civil War soldiers. The nation's heroes are truly represented in an amazing fashion, and that you should see at least once. Thank you for listening to the Talk with History podcast, and please reach out to us at our website, talkwithhistory.com. But more importantly, if you know someone else that might enjoy this podcast, please share this with them, especially if you think that today's topic would interest a friend. Shoot them a text and tell them to look up the Talk with History podcast, because we rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.